episode 23. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
Hi, everybody. I'm Gavin Ashenden.
Hey, how y'all doing? Right, we haven't seen you since
Awesome.
We haven't seen you since the coronation. We don't see you at all, but thank you for watching. You haven't seen us since the coronation of King Charles III. But we're back. A few things to discuss. I was at the National Conservatism Conference last week in London, which was very good, and wrote about that for the Herald. Gavin's been writing about Anglicans and how they're trans Catholics. So we're going to talk a bit about that. And artificial intelligence too, because you've been writing about that also, Gavin.
Trans Catholics and transhumanists, yes. Yeah, or humans, yes.
Trans Catholics and transhumans, yeah. So I was at this conference, which was not party political. It was really, in fact, many of the speakers spent a lot of their time criticising the Conservative Party for not conserving the traditions that you would hope they would as a Conservative Party. And what I'd written in my article at the Catholic Herald is that actually it was those speakers who were looking at things through a sacramental lens that I really think got the problems and had a ground that they could speak from about what's been lost in the culture. So Sebastian Morello was brilliant. Father Benedict Keeley was very good. Sebastian Milbank was good. Daniel French spoke as well. So this was a panel called God and Country, and it's well worth watching. So if you go to the National Conservatism Twitter feed or website, you'll see all the talks up there now. And actually Melanie Phillips was very good, I think, on how we have really become ashamed of our Judeo-Christian history, and that we've lost education. We spend our time in education apologizing and not really teaching the children about their cultural history. We've become ashamed of it. So there was a lot of really good stuff that I would definitely recommend going to watch, not because you might align with the political party, the Conservative Party, but just in terms of it was a really good exploration of how what we've lost and why it matters that we're losing it, and even to some extent, although this wasn't an easy thing to answer, how we might salvage some of what we've lost. And also Lois McClatchy, she spoke brilliantly. She works with ADF International, I think, and she spoke about how the pro-life cause is not a lost cause. And in fact, I attended a Right to Life event this week, and there's a lot of young people. So I think there's definitely a renewed sense, perhaps even I'd say in response to what happened to Isabel Vaughan-Spruce, that people are starting to realise what's being lost and how they have to stand up now and try and fight to retain it. So in the darkness, there is some light, I think. However, I know, Gavin, you're going to speak about Paul Kingsnorth, who may take a different view and think that perhaps there is nothing left to conserve. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, well, that was really interesting. I was quite jealous of you going to that conference. I'd like to have been there and seen some of those people. Who was it who said, it was you in your article who made that joke about some of the cleverest people on the right, and also Michael Gove.
Yeah,
I was alarmed by Paul Kingsnorth, who gave a talk at the Unheard Club, and I've become a great fan of his. Paul Kingsnorth has been doing some work with artificial intelligence and transhumanism, and frankly, I thought these were both beyond my pay grade. I didn't really understand them, and had no experience of them. Although I've been reading a little bit, of course, it's gone across my horizon. But Kingsnorth gave this talk at the Unheard Club, and said basically that the whole project of trying to conserve the West, the residue of Christianity, is useless. It's way gone past that. And so I concede for an article I've just written in the Catholic Herald of the Vandals being at the gates, the back gates and the front gates. So the back gates are the people coming at us from the last century: relativism, sexual disorder, diversity, inclusion, inequality, trying to get us to drop our understanding of human nature and our relationship with our sexuality. And we're having enough trouble fighting them off because there are so many fifth columnists in the church, people who are who are committed to an understanding of themselves as sexual beings before they're committed to to understanding of themselves being saved children of God. But Kingsnorth says that what's coming is what he calls an age of quantity, an age of the machine. And if you've had any of those emails from friends saying, hey, I've been mugged in Tahiti and I need you to send me a lot of money to this bank account because I can't get anywhere. I've had elderly friends who've fallen for this and actually sent money to these people. So, most people are wise to it now, but even though they all used American spelling and spoke in language that was completely different from the anxiety, the call to help is so powerful that people very often fall for it. However, there was a TV presenter being interviewed the other day, and she was the guy who was a boffin for AI said, I can recreate you perfectly from everything you've put on the internet. So he then said, look, these are the places you've been at holiday in the last 6 years. I've been trawling through your social media. This is where you've been. These are the things you've said. Here are the conversations you had on the internet. I can clone your voice, and I can reproduce the cloning of your voice to make you say and look like anything. I can reproduce you. I've got access to digital photography of you and your voice. I can make a new you, and everyone will think it's you. She was completely freaked out at the level of information he had, because we all put so much of our lives on the internet. So Kingsnorth was saying, using a French philosopher who became a Muslim, and used this idea of suggesting that the end of the 20th century we'd lose all sense of quality and moved into quantity, the area of things, and we'd have untrammeled desire. And capitalism has sanctified desire, so any desire is okay. And what digital technology will do is to promise us to meet all our desires. So already in the last few weeks, I've been getting adverts of chatbot ladies presenting themselves, inviting me to program them to be the kind of person I might most like to talk to, and they'll be very sympathetic to anything I want to talk about. Well, the mind boggles. Everyone knows where that's leading. They're already pretty convincing, and you'll have seen some of them on the internet already, but they're going to get more convincing and more receptive to whatever it is we want to do. So it's a kind of, we're going to be moving from a sort of the awful, brutalized mechanics of sexual pornography to a kind of existential pornography, where people, where digital representations will offer to give us everything we ever thought we wanted. And that's going to be a pit that's going to drag a lot of people into it. Then on top of that, there are the transhumanists who are trying to build the mind. Now, they called it the mind or the machine, and they're planning to download our consciousness into a digital framework that will contain it. So in other words, we might exist in two places at once. We might exist as we are somatically now, but we might also have a digital existence which lasts forever. If my brain can be downloaded, or my consciousness can be downloaded as a form of software, then something that is me or like me or derives from me will have its own independent existence in a kind of cosmic framework. It's not so much a Tower of Babel as a Cosmos of Babel. Now, they think they can do this. They think it'll be done by 2050. I have no idea. But what Kingsnorth says is this is a fight for reality. They're building a new God, a new structure for reality into which we will nestle, or could nestle, or could be downloaded. And one of the things the church is going to have to do is to begin to say, because Kingsnorth suggests that it's all in the first 3 chapters of Genesis, it's all about just because can you if you can do this, can you live with the consequences? Kingsnorth is going to say we're going to recapture ethics, recapture sanctity, recapture our conviction that human beings are not material, disposable, driven by desire, but actually driven by holiness, and the Augustinian notion that he made us for ourselves, and away from him we're going to be in deep trouble, is one we're going to have to try and persuade people about in order to stand between them and this appalling utopian experiment that makes everything we've been struggling with in the culture wars look really quite tame.
It's very interesting. Like that bit about the chatbot thing, I thought was particularly interesting, because if you look at, like you say, pornography is something that dehumanizes people and makes them objects that we can use. And this goes even further, doesn't it? And even that any kind of, it just takes the coercion out of it and means that any kind of relationship you have like on a sexual level, is just basically with something. Doesn't matter what it is, as long as it serves your need. I mean, it's it's taking all the fun out of it, isn't it?
Well, I'm sure it'll have all kinds of sexual implications. Why won't it? But I'm much more worried about the emotional implications. And if there's suddenly this wonderful, all-understanding chatbot who knows all about me and wants to listen to me and be sympathetic to me and say the things to me I want to hear, I'm likely to spend as much of my time talking to her or listening to her or engaging with her, because she'll be the most sympathetic person available. Why would I want to talk to a real human being who's only going to partially get me or rebuke me, or when I've got a chatbot who strokes everything emotionally that needs stroking? It's terrifying, because we all take the easy way out.
Well, Gavin, tell me why it mattered. What would you say to somebody who would say, look, so what? I'm lonely. There's this technology. I want to feel good. Who cares? Anything that can be constructed that makes my life easier, more comfortable, more pleasurable. Why is that wrong? What's the problem with it? Of course,
that's a superb question.
What would you say?
No, that's a superb question. That gets to the heart of it. I would say effectively because our understanding of ourselves, as we find St. Paul talking about, is that there's always at least two of us. There's a kind of lower self and a higher self. Sometimes for some of us, more complicated spectrum in between, for those of us who verge on multiple personality disorder. But the way in which we reconcile those two with the help of the Holy Spirit and the love of Christ and the forgiveness is by some synthesis of the two as they struggle together. And our best friends, the people who love us most, accompany us on a journey of struggling with our limitations, our lower desires to hurt, to revenge, to be selfish, and in a relationship that's fully compassionate and loving, to help us get beyond those things and to inspire one another to forgiveness. I mean, one of the hardest things to do in any marriage, any relationship, is to forgive, and it can only be done in a real relationship. So this whole business of forging holiness and moving from the lower self to the higher self, from corruption to salvation, can only be done in relationship with people. I mean, I could never do that myself. I need you to. I need you as my friends. I need my family. I need my community. I can't do it by myself. Then put me into the hands of a chatbot who's just going to allow me to indulge all the weakest and most promiscuous, I mean that emotionally more than anything else, elements of myself. I'm finished. I'm going to go straight into the quicksand and never reappear.
But Mill, John Stuart Mill already answered the criticisms against Bentham about the swine ethic of utilitarianism, talked about higher and lower pleasures. Why do we need to why turn to the transcendent? What's the transcendent got to do with it? Why can't you say, well, of course, Mill would agree and we should turn to opera and our fellow human beings, and there's an answer there. Why God?
Well, it's Jesus or Rousseau, really, because Mill and Bentham were essentially followers of Rousseau, and they thought human beings were blank slates in which if you simply increased the good, you might reduce the bad. But St. Paul says something completely different. He says that what we're really struggling with is an intelligent power of corruption that we give assent to, and it's not, and sadly opera and stamp collecting and beautiful statues won't do the trick. It's far more dynamic than that, and the evil and the corruption and the flaws we all live with are too great to allow opera to do it. I love opera. I'd be very holy if opera did it, but I'm not at all, so it doesn't. So we need the Holy Spirit, we need Jesus, we need prayer, we need the whole life in the Spirit as the antidote to the very powerful corruption that all human beings suffer. And if anyone doesn't believe in human corruption, then look at the bloody 20th century. And I mean, the 20th century is corruption writ large. That's what human beings are like when left to opera and stamp collecting.
I suppose it's, what do these things point to? A symbol is always a finger pointing to the moon, isn't it? Like, it's not about the finger, it's about the moon. And so we have
Bruce Lee, that famous philosopher.
Exactly. He got it right.
Well, also C.S. Lewis has a lot about fingers and pointing, which is probably what Catherine's quoting. Yeah.
Well, whoever it was.
Whoever. Awesome.
I found that quite interesting. Last weekend there was an article in the BBC about Satanism, and this SatanCon, and actually SatanCon was full of grumpy ex-Christians who couldn't do what they wanted to do and turn their back on the church because they felt so aggrieved by it, and then threw themselves into SatanCon that is full of this dark symbolism, and they're so blind. And there was a woman interviewed who said, well, I was a bit worried at first. I thought they might be sacrificing babies, but in the end, I got to know them, and they were really good people. They weren't doing that at all. A paragraph later, they spoke about an abortion clinic that they'd set up, yes, and how so there's this blindness that actually, so the symbolism that we have in our church really matters. The rituals that we have in our church really matter about keeping us in defense against this artificial intelligence you're talking about. It grounds us in a reality, and we can so easily be turned by false symbols that point to a different reality. In fact, the unreal, that point to the unreal, that point to artificiality. And there's that blindness to that they've just swapped truth for lies, but they're still taking part in these strange dark symbols that direct them and show them exactly what they're doing, and they still can't see it. And in fact, evidence that to prove what Baudelaire said, that most of them said, we don't really believe in the devil.
No, they've no idea what they're doing.
No, but it ain't good.
If they'd ever tasted despair, they wouldn't go anywhere. I mean, they clearly haven't. They don't understand what the dark side brings. I mean, the dark side brings this lies of utter condemnation and despair. And anyone who's ever tasted despair would run 1,000,000 miles to get away from the devil and in the arms of Christ, who is the antidote of all despair. They've no idea what they're doing, like children playing with nuclear buttons.
No, and in fact, the BBC had an article 2 or 3 years ago about a guy called Daniel Hussein, who murdered 2 women in a park and was found to have been dabbling in the occult and Satanism. And although this piece seemed to be about cuddly Satanists and bad Catholics, I think that the reality is far closer to the Daniel Hussein story, and the abortion clinics. That this has real effects, really deadly. We got onto Satanism.
Well done, guys.
It's no surprise, in fact, that we did steer from AI to Satanism. It's no surprise at all. Yeah.
I thought Gavin's pieced the camera about. Did you write about it as well, Gavin? The Transhumanists?
I did. Yes, I did both. Yes.
Anglicanism was really interesting. Like that, I thought that was really good. And then there was a bit of a conversation with Calvin, wasn't there? Robinson from GB News. Which sort of I followed. Yeah, and he interacted with all 3 of us a little bit, I think, and obviously you know him. And I find this whole thing absolutely fascinating. I find the journey really, really fascinating. And I feel, I was saying to Catherine, I feel a lot of empathy for Calvin and his position. And, you know, I did with you, like when you were sort of seeking as well. And like from my perspective, you know, I think we've said before, I've always been a bit of a Deus Vult sort of Catholic, like that you know, it seems fairly obvious that there's not. But also at the same time, regular listeners will know that I do Bible study at the Baptist Church once a week, and I've got lots of friends who are Anglicans. The best man at my wedding is an Anglican. And I've got good friends in the Ordinariate, so I'm sort of familiar with this journey. And one of the most moving experiences that I had was when an Ordinariate priest took me to Walsingham, to the shrine. And that was the first time I'd been to Walsingham. And it was where he really found and grew his faith and was able to explain to me that journey to be an Anglican and to be a Catholic, you know, as they see it. And we all cradle Catholics. I know, like Catherine's exact. We've had this conversation a number of times. We sort of scratch our heads because we don't understand. But it's like for me, it's like I can totally understand where Calvin is coming from, because Calvin is focused on following Jesus, and these are the tools that have been given to him. These are the things that have been given to him, and he's in this place where he's doing what he has been given. He's fulfilling that to the fullness of his ability. And, you know, obviously you can tell that he's really trying, he really believes it, and he really understands it, and he's following it as fully as he can. And I see that with my Baptist friends. You know, I wouldn't dream of saying that they weren't authentic or that their faith wasn't authentic. I think it's extremely authentic, inspirational even. But I can also see that there are elements that are missing from that. Now, you can't go to them and say, "Oh, look at you know," you can't just go to people and say, "Oh, but you know, look what you're missing out on. You should be in our club because we've got much better stuff." And you especially can't do that when you've got a situation when our bishops are so rubbish at Catholic, you know, that you would be forgiven for thinking that Jesus didn't have anything interesting to say if they were the only representatives of him you ever met. You know, I mean, they never fail to disappoint. There's very little evangelization going on. They don't speak to the culture, which is obviously Calvin's main thing. And then you've got abject heresy. You've got cardinals now and bishops advocating for anti-Christian positions from within the church. So it's very difficult to go and say, look, here is the exemplar of a Christian life. But in that quietness of your heart, when you're living your faith and your prayer life and the liturgy yourself, then there can be no doubt that this is the fullness of the faith. This is the fullness of truth is available to you. And so it's a case of living it. And when you want to go deeper, I think that these people, and I'd be interested in your perspective on this, Gavin, but it feels to me like when you want to go deeper, all the answers are Catholic answers, and you drift into a deeper kind of faith, and you find that, you know, it's like the dream of Gerontius in a way, you know, you find that those dreams are Catholic dreams. What do you think?
I want to put it much more. I put it much more strongly than that. When I was 20, I had a Reliant Robin, and I thought all men knew how to manage their motor cars and their engines. And someone told me it needed decoking, so I got the engine out of my Reliant Robin and I put it in a vicarage where a friend of mine lived, and we took it to pieces and decoked it and put it back together again. And at the end of it, there were 4 pieces left over that should have been in the engine, and it never worked again. And the thing is, so it didn't work. It had everything, but it didn't work because I hadn't put it together in the right thing. Now, if you imagine you're a Catholic for a moment and you don't, but neither the Mass nor the Magisterium works. So when you go to Mass, there is no supernatural miracle. It's just a bit of blessed bread. There's no forgiveness in confession, and there's no agreement on what ethics are. What would the church work? Would that be a working faith? No, it doesn't work. Well, that's Anglo-Catholicism.
But they don't know that it is, though, do they? When you're in,
no, they don't know. Well, that's right. I mean, I suspected it didn't, which is why I spent my life as an Anglican priest asking the Lord to give me a special dispensation to be able to consecrate the host. I said, Lord, I'm pretty sure I don't have the authority to do this, and I'm pretty sure my orders are null and void. And I find this very upsetting, and it really pisses me off when people mention apostolicae curiae. But you know, would you mind, as a special favor to me and you, because I love you a lot, if you wouldn't just mind transubstantiating it, you know? And it's not just for me, Lord, it's for all these people. Don't think it's for me, it's for them. And now, did he do it? Well, what if he didn't? I suspect he didn't do it. So there, I always suspected that he was really doing it in the Catholic Church up the road, but wasn't doing it. And I put in an aumbry to reserve the sacrament. I put in candles. I made the candlesticks bigger. I put in more beautiful vestments. I did everything I could to make it look like it was happening. And I think that's what Anglo-Catholicism is. And the trouble is, they don't mean Catholic when they say that. It's not Anglo-Catholicism. It's Anglo, but it's Anglo-nostalgic sacramentalism. They know there's something missing. They desperately want Jesus in the host. But because the people who invented their church threw the Pope out, excommunicated anybody who wanted to bring the Mass, derived a liturgy where the supernatural miracle couldn't happen, broke the link of both intention and form for priesthood and episcopacy. For 100 years, there were no priests and bishops in the Edwardine ordination services. They then built them on backwards, as if, rather like my Reliant engine, by building it on backwards, you could restore what was missing, like putting embalming a corpse, making it look pretty, but actually it's dead. The moment they cut it off from the Pope, it died. So what is all the dressing up? What is all the bowing? What are all the what do they do? Well, that's the tranny bit, because you say to a man who wears lipstick and high heels, look, love, you're just dressing up. It doesn't change your ovaries, your hormones, or your DNA. And so Protestant Anglicans are just dressing up. It doesn't mean the miracle happens. There is no forgiveness in reconciliation. There is no transubstantiation in the Mass, and there's absolutely no magisterium. So why do it? It's an act of self-deception. Now, this only matters when it starts to matter. So because it's so comfortable, they have so many resources, because there are huge privileges in living in as an Anglican. No one tells you to be obedient. There's no obedience. There's no humility in terms of putting yourself under someone's authority. There's no accepting pieces of dogma you don't very much like. There's you do what you want. It's self-indulgent paradise. But the thing about becoming a Catholic is you have to pay a price for it, and the price is humility, and it's obedience, and it's living with people who are not very good at fulfilling the office, because you love and you trust the office. I love and I trust the office of the papacy. I happen to think that Papa Francisco is not the best pope we ever had, but the office is the best thing that ever was. And so it's a Protestant thing to say, I can't be a Catholic because the bishops aren't much good and I don't like papal ambiguity. That's a Protestant response. The Catholic response is to say, look at this amazing structure. It's got us through 2,000 years and it'll go on doing it. Sorry about the present tenants. There'll be a wash and brush up soon. We'll get some other ones. The Holy Spirit will come to our rescue. And so the reason I wrote it is not because I want to say my new club's better, or look, I've seen the light everybody else ought to, but partly because you saw that the Forward in Faith bishop said, guys, the only way to really save ourselves is to be truly, authentically, totally and utterly Catholic, he said, when he's being totally and utterly ordained. Yes, of course he is. But he's got to say that.
Yeah.
He's got to keep up the pretense the emperor has clothes, or else he has to become a Catholic. Why not just become a Roman Catholic?
So there's a couple of things that I think are interesting. One is that, like Calvin's narrative that Anglo Catholics they predate Rome. I didn't say that it's a Celtic version of Catholicism that predates the papacy, which I thought was sort of an interesting argument.
Yes, no, it's completely untrue. And I was talking to the Bishop of Waterford about this. I was Bishop Alphonsus, a lovely guy, and I was saying, look, I don't know enough about this. I know quite a lot about it. But I was saying, what don't I know? And he said, go and read St. Patrick's life story. It's all in there. He's totally, you can't get a more Celtic saint than he's the embodiment of everything that happened on the West Coast, of all Celtic monastic spirituality. All goes back to Patrick. He said, read Patrick. You could not get more Roman than Patrick. That's it. What they've done is they've reimagined it in their own according to their own preferences, to cut out the Roman Catholicism, to diminish it. It's a fancy. It doesn't cost you anything to say that there was an indigenous Christianity that was pre-St. Augustine of Canterbury, and it got on very well, so we can too. But it isn't true in that sense. And certainly, if you look across I got to know St. Martin of Tours quite well. And if you read his amazing biography, it's completely Roman Catholic. Yeah, the problem is they're not.
Existentially, what you're left with is Roman Catholicism, isn't it? Like, if you look at the church, if you believe in God and if you believe in divine providence, what we have is Roman Catholicism. That's all it can be. And to be part of some splinter element of a thing that might be, and to say, oh well, we're following this difficult, confused line of authority or whatever, you just got to, at some point you've got to have the humility to get with the program, haven't you? And the other
you have, and you've got
39 steps, the 39 articles.
39 steps. Yeah.
That's part of, you have to assent to the 39 articles, which are viciously anti-Catholic, aren't they?
The masses are Well, you can't. It says the Mass is a vain and blasphemous fable. It says, how can you be an Anglican priest and stand up?
The Mass?
Well, you can't. So, but then you see the Anglicans say, "Oh, yeah, but you only have to assent to the 39 Articles, and nobody knows what it means to assent to them." Well, that becomes duplicitous. I mean, that's trickery. That's dishonest. How is God served by dishonest, duplicitous trickery? He's not. He's not at all. I mean, I'm afraid I find myself saying that actually Anglicanism isn't even a church. It's a collection of different theological positions and different spiritualities for the sake of producing an Erastian religious structure, and it does it quite well. But it's not a church. You can't leave it. Nobody knows what it is to belong to it. If you ask any Anglican in the street, what are the constituent elements of belief you have to be an Anglican, not one of them will tell you. They don't know. How is that a church? It isn't. But the problem is, it's nice and pious make believe. I don't. But people who want to be Anglo-Catholic are expressing very good and wholesome holy desires. They're saying, I want Jesus in the sacrament. I want beauty, liturgy, transcendence, authority. But you know what? I'm not going to pay the price for them. I just want them on my own terms. And that's the bit that I think is tranny. That's because and the reason I say it with some conviction or passion is it cost me a lot to become a Roman Catholic. It costs you both a lot to live as Roman Catholics. It doesn't cost anything to be a tranny Catholic. It doesn't cost anything. It's dressing up. And therefore, you have to ask, where is the virtue in that?
It's very much like St. John Henry Newman called it mimetic, didn't he? And one of his that Anglicanism is mimetic, that it replicates. It's like a phasmid. It pretends to be Catholic, or it has all the outward signs of Catholicism, but none of the actual. It doesn't cost you anything substance in terms of morals. Yeah.
The Robin engine doesn't work. There are bits left over. It's not put together properly. It looks nice as an engine, though.
Explain though, isn't it? From this side, like it's a difficult discussion to have in charity.
Well, I think
that, it's sorry, Catherine, go on.
No, I was just going to say that's why relationship is so important, and it is difficult. So you have people standing on the side of the road with signs saying Jesus loves you, and that's great. But it's not hugely effective as an evangelization tool because there's no relationship. So you're just walking past someone, and the message is true, but it's not grounded in relationship. So I think even what we're doing here is difficult because we're doing it through the medium of the internet, and we're not interacting with people. So, but the things you're doing, Mark, going into the Baptist church, and we all do variations of that, is actually meeting people and having these discussions. Because I said on Twitter in response to your video, Gavin, that this is an act of love. And I really believe it's an act of love. Tell me why you think that's true as well, that this is loving.
Well, so first of all, I don't want to offend any of my friends. I can't tell you how many dear friends I've got who remain Anglican and whose piety and love of Jesus and love of the church is very deep and better than mine. There's not that at all. The thing that really pushed me over the edge were the Eucharistic miracles. So for a very long time, I talked about the real presence, whatever the real presence is. I've been looking it up recently, and there's, nobody knows what the real presence is. But the Eucharistic miracles really blew me away because I finally understood what transubstantiation was intended to convey. So transubstantiation is not a thing. It's an idea derived from Aristotle, but in a particular scholastic context, to try and give those of us who want to get a mystery made sense of in our head a means of doing it. But that's not really a legitimate process. It's just that you can't avoid it. Transubstantiation doesn't happen like that. These are Greek philosophical categories we have overlaid over a mystery. So how do you distinguish between the real presence and transubstantiation? The thing that really blew me away was when they took bleeding hosts that Catholic priests had dropped, and they put them in water and they began to bleed, and they took them to the laboratory and they found living white blood cells. Living white blood cells. That's transubstantiation. That's the Catholic Mass. And are there any Anglican Eucharistic miracles? I don't think there are. Actually, to put it in brackets, there are Anglicans who, like me, had some Episcopal derivation from Catholic bishops. And it may be that amongst them, they do have the power to do it. Actually, I thought one of the reasons I accepted this rather quaint, eccentric Episcopal post with orders that came from the Brazilian Catholic bishop in South America was because it was a way of dealing with the deficit of my own sacramental inability. But so let's say that in America, there are others like that. That's great. That's really wonderful. but it still doesn't mean that you live the full Catholic life, which can only be if you're in sacramental relationship with the Petrine office, I think. And that's so the act of love is to say to people, look, do the thing properly. Don't, there are all kinds of privileges. It makes it easier to be an Anglican. You get property, you get different rules, it's where you're used to being. But the real thing is the Catholic Church needs everybody on board. It was when my local diocesan bishop said, Gavin, stop doing this outside the church, do it inside the church. The church needs you. And I wasn't just being flattered. I realized the Catholic Church really did need me. Actually, I didn't know how much it needed me. I really didn't know what a shit show it was. and so people say, well, look, it's a terrible shit show, frying pan into fire, they say. And I said, that's why we have to become Catholics.
Yeah. I love
because that. Because it's all hands on deck.
I love that little quote from Mother Teresa to Malcolm Muggeridge when he said, well, God needs good people outside the church as well. And she just said, no, he doesn't. And said,
yes.
And so I know it's not that simple, but actually there's a beauty to that simplicity. No, he doesn't. And he became Catholic. I thought it was interesting. I spoke with you, Mark, about the Eucharistic miracles. And I think this is a difference between men and women, and really the masculine and the feminine, because I think that's wonderful. The Buenos Aires miracle, the cells, the white blood cells, the blood type. But for me, that wouldn't convince me of anything. And Mark was saying that's because you're a woman. And I thought that was really interesting, because it also links with the AI stuff, because I really see that as the godless masculinity that Alice von Hildebrand spoke about. And I think we've lost that femininity. And so that when you say that, it appeals to the masculine. It's an answer. Everything is an answer, but we've lost the ground, the question, the space of the feminine. And so we're just filling. And so that's, I thought that was just interesting, Mark, that scientific approach, which is good and will convince people, and people are convinced in different ways, doesn't really do anything for me in terms of the mystery.
Yeah, I always think it's both ends, that we need, we need to layer up that knowledge. And I know from sort of catechesis that it really does help guys to have those fact, to a bit of science goes a long way, sort of thing, and there's a lot of science out there, so it's all good. Not scientism. We're suffering today from a lot of scientism, and that's sort of a real problem, and especially when it comes to the Eucharist is a brilliant way of sort of talking about that. And it sort of strikes me what Gavin was saying, that the whole thing about with the Baptists, I find that what you're doing is that, their sincerity and their genuine desire for Christ is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
And when you can layer it up with a bit of Catholic colour, it becomes so much more powerful, and they love it. They absorb, because and that makes me think that their faith has enormous integrity, because they're just interested in Christ. And that reminds me of me, because I kind of feel like, I always felt like quite attracted to the Dominican spirituality, that truth was at the forefront of my own search for faith. That was.
Sorry, Mark, to quote Mrs. Bennett, it's all about Descartes. I mean, it all goes back to the Baptists are Cartesians. I think, therefore I am. The world of the spirit is separate from the world of the body. And the difference is not the problem with Baptist or Anglican piety. God bless them. They're as pious as anybody. It's what they make of matter, and whether or not matter can be infused with sanctity. Catholics have discovered that it can be, which is why we do relics and bodies that don't decompose and hosts that bleed, because that's how profoundly the kingdom of heaven's got into them. But Baptists, being good children of the Enlightenment and being Cartesian, thinks the spirit and the body are all totally different areas, and we don't expect them to interact. That's where the difference is. Not with piety, not with but all to do with the interlacing of matter and spirit.
Yeah.
Their understanding of sacrament is that it doesn't actually do anything. It doesn't actually happen.
Exactly.
Just an outward sign.
Yeah, but it's very interesting. I'd be very interested to know what they mean by that. Doesn't do anything. In what way do they understand that?
Well, I think
they're almost the similar.
No, so we recently had one of our little team was baptized, and I was talking to them about it, and they were saying that that the change has already occurred. They've in the mind, and then the actual baptism, the sacrament, is just a sign of that change having taken place, which really disappointed me. I kind of thought, and they, funnily enough, in there they've got a little handbook, almost like you might call it a catechism, Gavin, that they've put together in this church with some fundamentals in it. And in there, it defines baptism, which is their one sacrament, obviously, and it defines sacrament. And it defines sacrament as an outward sign of an inner grace, which is pretty much the same definition we would use. But obviously, we believe that there's an ontological change and that God gives us those outward signs because, revelation, God is in the world. God is in the world. And
so they think the Catholics practice magic, and that's why they don't like the sacramentalism, because they think that if we think our prayers affect matter, that's like magic, isn't it? So in other words, they take the black arts and say there can't be a Christian version of them, making them white arts. We have to get rid of the arts altogether. But the black arts are in fact a perversion of the white arts. There is indeed a Christian magic, if you want to use that kind of language. Magic happens every time the Mass is celebrated. Jesus did magic when he healed people from the dead and restored eyes. That's Christian magic, if you want to use that word. But it's become, of course, a Gnostic word from magus, and we don't use it. We've left it only to the black arts people. But it's out of their fear of the black arts, the Baptists say, no, nothing happens to the matter. It's all in the purity of the heart or the mind. And that's why it's Cartesian. And it's not fully incarnational, which is why, again, they don't understand. They don't understand that statues bleed, icons weep, the Holy Spirit gets into matter. And St. Paul's handkerchief, what do they think what that was about? This is a magic relic that heals. They have. If you ever want to upset a Baptist, ask him about the early relic of Paul's handkerchief, because that really blows their Enlightenment mind view apart. And the only way they can stitch it back again is to become a Catholic.
No, it's great. And that's what I love. I love the sort of interaction, because it feels very much like colouring in those pictures in a lovely way. Because they're. As I say, I'm in awe of their faith, and so that adds a great deal to me. But at the same time, we had a great discussion when they had communion at the church, and they knew that I'd have a problem with it, and so they sort of confronted me about it. And in order to try and make me feel better, they asked if I'd actually preside over
Oh, bless!
I'll make you feel better.
That's wonderful. But imagine if the Baptists came Roman Catholics with all their passion for evangelism, and learned to understand the power of holy matter. I mean, that's what the devil's managed to do by splitting Anglicans and Baptists and Catholics into separate places, giving them all different graces, each where we need each other's graces. We need the Anglicans and the Baptists to become Catholics, just as Catherine said. God does not need them outside the church. Everyone's got to get back in the real church, bringing all the gifts and graces that have been separated because of these wretched schisms.
Yeah,
exactly. That's perfectly said. Yeah,
and only the Catholic Church answers that who we are, or creature we are, and that's the thing is if you really dig down, you say they love Christ, and of course they do, but if you really go to the end of that, how does that then manifest in us as human persons? How do we live as body and soul, one human person? And the sacraments give answer to that in the only way that is possible, and that's real. That's why I say, what does reality actually mean then?
I've always had this
real effect through the sacraments.
I'm sorry to talk across you. I keep on. I think I'll forget my point of view, but so I haven't finished. I got too excited and carried away. Go on. Well, I've always had this image of the Catholic Church as a big Rolls Royce, and so there are three images. There's the Rolls Royce, there's petrol, and there's the instruction book. And the Pentecostals have got petrol, but they keep on putting it into these go-karts. And they go zooming around the track, and then they do one lap of the track, and then they blow up in smoke and excitement, and they build themselves another go-kart. But all the while, there's the Rolls Royce there with this magnificently precise engineer, and the petrol. Put that petrol in the Rolls Royce, and it'll go for millions of miles. It'll never blow up. But the dear Protestants are immersing themselves in the guidebook, but they don't have any petrol or a car to sit in. They understand perfectly the theory of it, but it's not. So this is very unfair to everybody. But you have to have, the Catholic Church is the Rolls Royce of ecclesiologies, but it badly needs fuel and needs people who understand the instructions. And the evangelicals understand the instructions because they read the Bible, and the Pentecostals understand the importance of fuel because they blow it up all the time. And both of them belong in the Rolls Royce. So guys, come back and join the church Jesus founded.
Brilliant. That's exactly what we need. Right, look, you guys.
What we need. You've got to go to work.
So far, I'm going to have to go back to
work. Gavin's got to go and talk to his chatbot. So we'll call it a day. Have a nice afternoon, Gav.
Harsh. Have mercy. Bless you all. Good.
Thanks for watching, for listening. We'll see you again for Catholic Unscripted 24. I'm Catherine Bennett.
I'm Mark Lambert.
And I'm Gavin Ashenden, and there is no chatbot.
No.